When Joe sent me an email on Monday afternoon, I guess he figured I'd be available for 8 o'clock Wednesday because the water hazards are still frozen over at the golf course. Also, when he wrote me Monday afternoon, he didn't tell me what the topic was. But that didn't bother me because I've always lived by the maxim to never let lack of knowledge impede expression of opinion. Fortunately, I found it was on reimbursement, which is something I do have some passing knowledge about. So thank you, Joe, and thank you, Mitch, I think, and thank you for the great music. I mean, Sorcerer's Apprentice is the only one I've identified so far, so it was cool stuff. What's happening in reimbursement today? Well, a lot of things that have been going on for a lot of years continue to happen. We have lengthy regulatory approval times. We have restrictive and increasingly restrictive government formularies. We're dealing with a very unpredictable reimbursement environment, and it wasn't that many years ago when we could get a product from a client, take a look at it, and say, your chances of getting listed are very good. Now it's more like, I don't know, we'll see what's going to happen. Pricing that we're being allowed, and I don't mean by the board, which David spoke to, but by the reimbursement community, does not seem to recognize innovation at all. And I believe we have a significant duplication of effort. CDR, when it was developed, which was a very poorly minded political decision in my opinion, was supposed to get rid of all the secondary review sources. Not sure that would have been a good thing, but one thing that hasn't happened. Ontario has come out and said specifically we're going to do our own thing. Quebec has always done their own thing. Other provinces now are starting to do their own thing as well. Plus you have JODR to deal with, and most recently, and this is probably a good thing, at least we're moving forward, is everyone's got a new idea on what we're going to do with drugs for rare disorders. We have a trend analysis here that was based on IMS hospital and retail data that shows the average time to listing is actually improving in the 4 largest provinces, and on average it's improving right across the board in all provinces. However, listing rates of new single-source medicines continue to be below 20%. And what is surprising to me is how low Alberta's gone in the last 2 years. I mean, Alberta was the bastion of right-wing consumerism, and from our perspective in our industry, it doesn't appear to be so. Quebec, on the other hand, who is not a signatory to CDR, continues to be the highest province with the highest listing rate. I don't have a pointer up here, I don't think, so we'll just talk in colors. But this goes back to just before the onset of CDR, which was actually implemented in September 2003. The first decision from the Canadian Expert Drug Advisory Committee came out a little less than a year later. And as you can see in this slide that talks about time to listing, for the first 2 years, it was steady in Ontario. It was declining as an average, increased a lot in BC, because BC was the one province that said we're going to do exactly what CDR says. But since CDR started making decisions, we've seen tremendous decline and that's a good thing, in the number of days that it takes to get a product listed. So there is some positive news out there. This next slide that looks a lot the same actually looks at the listing rates by province of new innovative products. Quebec is still way above everybody else, despite the fact that if you deal in the Quebec market exclusively or a lot, you'll have noticed over the past 2 to 3 years that it's got exceptionally more difficult than it has in previous years with Quebec. They've increased the number of pieces of paper you have to fill out. They've made the rules much more stringent and don't appear to be letting us through the gaps as much as they used to. Not surprisingly, the provincial average almost mirrors the Ontario average, just due to the impact that Ontario has on the entire listing environment. We have a few slides coming up that look at the performance of CDR and the drugs that they have reviewed. This was dated March 16th of this month. 153 submissions were made to CDR since its inception in September 2003, and 127 recommendations were made on those products. 48% of those recommendations were positive and 51% were negative. The following three slides break down the total submissions, the listing of drugs on public formularies, and the listing of drug on public formularies including special plans such as Exceptional Assets Program or Section 16 in Ontario and the Special Authorization Program in Quebec, etc., where they exist. I would like to say that these slides are compliments and used with permission of our friend George Wyatt at Wyatt Health Management and are part of his CDR tracker report. You can see in statistics since the inception that 153 submissions were made, 62% were positive, 85% negative, 4 were not released for whatever reason. 11 products are still under review at this time, and 11 products were withdrawn at the manufacturer's request. In a somewhat more complicated